Today was yet another day of January 6th hearings. Of course, this is the investigation carried out by the House Select Committee investigating the Capitol riots on January 6th. And one of the focuses of today's hearing was on a DOJ lawyer by the name of Jeffrey Clark. And he was essentially an individual within the Justice Department who was considered to replace the acting attorney general because he was one of Trump's henchmen, one of Trump's lapdogs, one of the individuals who was attempting to overturn the election on behalf of Donald Trump. Now, luckily, there was enough pushback from other officials within the Justice Department to prevent that from happening. But I want to start off with this video that shows how Trump met with Jeff Clark through Republican Congressman Scott Perry. In the video, you're going to hear testimony from a DOJ official about what Clark's role was, what he was trying to accomplish, and what the impact would be.
Mr. Donahue, on December 28th, Mr. Clark emailed you and Mr. Rosen a draft letter that he wanted you to sign and send to Georgia state officials. You testified that this could have, quote, grave constitutional consequences. Mr. Donahue, can you tell us what you meant by that?
Well, I had to read both the email and the attached letter twice to make sure I really understood what he was proposing, because it was so extreme to me. I had a hard time getting my head around it initially. So I thought it was very important to give a prompt response rejecting this out of hand. In my response, I explained a number of reasons this is not the department's role to suggest or dictate to state legislatures how they should select their electors. But more importantly, this was not based on fact. This was actually contrary to the facts as developed by department investigations over the last several weeks and months.
Did Mr. Clark continue to push his concept in the coming days?
He did, yes.
That last part's really important because even after discussing this with former acting attorney general, a deputy attorney general, Rich Donahue, the individual you heard testimony from there, after he was told there is absolutely no weight behind what you're saying here, and under no circumstances will we carry out this alternate slate of electors garbage, he still continued pushing, again, on behalf of Donald Trump to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. And wouldn't you know it, turns out that the FBI raided Jeffrey Clark's home today. He's outraged about it, but I think there was enough testimony and enough evidence in the hearing today, Jessica, to show that he deserved to have his house raided. He absolutely should be investigated. And I'll give you more details about that raid in just a moment. But first, I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Every other legal mind that was in the room with Donald Trump when they met for like 2.5 hours, essentially talking about, are we going to replace the attorney general? Not because someone was refusing to investigate this. They had already investigated this and found in the data that there was no evidence of fraud. And so this was Donald Trump asking the DOJ to operate based on his will, not really through any due process. There wasn't anything that was found that they were refusing to pursue or investigate. He just wanted to find someone who would do whatever he wanted them to do. And Jeffrey Clark was like, yeah, I'm your guy. And it kind of makes sense, right? He's an environmental lawyer. A lot of times people who are environmental lawyers do good work, but oftentimes they also do work for oil companies, right? If you imagine what his career was like, he was probably doing whatever was necessary for people with money and power. It's probably how he spent his entire career. And the DOJ raiding his home is huge. This means that there's something in his house that would prove evidence he committed a crime or Donald Trump committed a crime.
So let's talk a little bit about that FBI raid this morning, because first, it's worth noting that he did in fact promote conspiracy theories within the Justice Department, such as that Chinese spies use thermometers to tamper with US voting machines, according to internal emails made public in a Senate Judiciary Committee 2021 report. There's more though. In the days before January 6th, Clark helped Trump devise a plan to oust then acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen. By the way, one of the people who pushed back against Clark and Trump quite aggressively, place himself atop the department. So he would be the head of the DOJ, the acting attorney general, and have the DOJ intervene in Georgia to set aside its voting results in order to sway the state toward Trump, as I mentioned earlier, with the whole sham electors nonsense that they tried out in other swing states where Trump lost. Now, let's get to that notorious January 3rd meeting. So as CNN reports, during this dramatic January 3rd, 2021 Oval Office meeting, Rosen, his then deputy Richard Donoghue, and the head of the Office of Legal Counsel, Stephen Engel, all threatened to resign in protest, which ultimately, by the way, convinced Trump not to place Jeffrey Clark as the head of the DOJ, which is kind of shocking. But I guess at that point, Trump was backed into a corner because it's not just a few high-level DOJ officials who are like, look, if you do this, we're gonna quit. Everyone who was spoken to within the Justice Department said that they would quit. And that would be a bit of a crisis for Donald Trump. He realized he couldn't do it. And at one point, he actually asked, Rosen, all right, well, what are you gonna do if are you gonna fire Jeffrey Clark? Because at that point, Jeffrey Clark was his subordinate. And Rosen's like, that's not up to me, that's up to you. And Donald Trump's like, nah, I'm not gonna fire him. So he remained in the DOJ, but keep in mind, there isn't much time left in this administration in the first place.
Yeah, it's crazy to imagine just like being in the room with this group of guys as they're having these conversations. And maybe Trump was swayed by all of them saying, this is an awful idea. You're proposing that if you appoint Jeffrey Clark as acting attorney general, at that point, Donald Trump was like changing attorney generals like he's changing his socks, right? It would have been like 3 within a month, which is insane. You can't do that with public officials. But in any case, they're like, hey, his first act as attorney general, he just stated, would be to be committing a felony. This is criminal behavior. And I think at some point, Donald Trump had to be a little bit scared, right? He's lived a very privileged life. He probably can't even imagine being in a jail or prison cell.
Oh, definitely not. I mean, I think even today, he's so entitled and thinks he's so above the law that he would never expect to see the inside of a prison cell. But since you mentioned how it was announced during this meeting that on his first day Clark would commit a felony, I thought that the testimony coming from White House lawyer Eric Herschman was interesting. So this is what happened with that testimony. So Trump White House lawyer Eric Herschman said Clark was repeatedly clobbered over the head during the meeting. He said that he explicitly told Clark that he was breaking the law, according to his videotape deposition with the committee. Effing a-hole, congratulations, you just admitted your first step or act you would take as attorney general would be committing a felony, Herschman said. He's a colorful fellow, to say the least. He likes to use strong language, and I always appreciate anyone who does so. But it's true, and it's important to hear this testimony, not just from Democratic lawmakers, right? Because I think that what they have to say is immediately gonna be discounted by potentially independent voters or obviously Republican voters. To hear from members of Trump's administration, White House lawyers who served under Trump say these things is important, even if it doesn't convince people who are ultra MAGA chuds or whatever it is, that's fine. But you need to have a clear historical record of what really transpired.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have Republicans all over the place saying this is kangaroo court, it's partisan, the Democrats are just doing this. But you have really high level people that were in the administration that were super critical of what Trump was trying to do, which was steal the election. And all of these guys were super mean to Jeffrey Clark. And they had some really funny one-liners where they were like, oh, just go back to your office, we'll call you if there's an oil spill. Because Jeffrey Clark had no experience investigating criminal cases. He had never been on one. So how could you appoint this person to be the attorney general and run the DOJ? You really can't. But this is the position Trump was in, and it was a desperate one where there was no one but this one person who was not that high up in the DOJ, but was in the DOJ that was like, maybe I'll do what you ask me to do. But this was not someone who had an understanding of what was going on or had any experience investigating things like elections.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.